303. Predestination. Chalcedon Report number 81, May the 1st, 1972. Predestination is very much a political issue today, and a very central one. The churches have little to say on the subject these days. They either do not believe in it, or are often embarrassed by the entire question. Predestination is simply the doctrine of total law, total government, and total planning. The important question is not, do we believe in it, but rather, whose predestination do we believe in? The alternative to predestination is a universe of meaningless and brute factuality, a world of chance. Predestination goes by a number of other names in its humanistic and anti-Christian versions. It is called scientific determinism, dialectical materialism, scientific socialist planning, and a number of other names. Modern humanistic predestination is total planning and control by the state and its elite planners. It has a concept of an electing decree, but not by God, but rather by man, statist man. Moreover, because predestination is an inescapable concept, as men have denied predestination by God, they have affirmed predestination by the state. Predestination is an unavoidable concept, not only because it is a God-ordained category of thought, but also because the alternative to a purpose and plan is chance and meaninglessness, and man requires meaning. Without meaning and direction to life, man perishes. Today, in our existentialist age, even 7-year-old boys are committing suicide. Man requires a meaning and a plan to life, an assured and certain direction. The problem enters in when he chooses to find that meaning and plan in man or the state rather than in God. Man is then courting the world of George Orwell's 1984. He is asking for a totalitarian humanistic order as his preferred alternative to a totalitarian government by the sovereign God. The origins of our present crisis are important to understand. In pagan antiquity, religion was an aspect of political order. Man's basic hope was in political salvation. Man was regarded as a political animal, the creature of the state, and therefore entirely subject to the government and power of the state. With the coming of Christianity, a long battle began between statism and biblical faith. See R.J. Rushdoony, The Foundations of Social Order, Nutley, New Jersey, Presbyterian and Reformed Publishing Company, 1968. Throughout the centuries, the predominance has gone back and forth, but in the now dying modern era, the age of the state, men have looked to the state rather than to God for their salvation. Previously, in Christian eras, men looked to the sovereign God for government and law. With the Enlightenment, however, predestination by God was replaced with predestination by, quote, nature, end quote. The idea that such a thing as, quote-unquote, nature exists is, of course, a myth. Nature is a collective noun for a universe of particular facts. It is not nominalism to deny the reality of nature as a governing being or entity. Enlightenment thinkers, however, saw, quote, nature, end quote, as a governing, predestinating entity which so perfectly ordained all things that, in the words of Alexander Pope in his Essay on Man, all nature is but art, unknown to thee, all chance, direction which thou canst not see, all discord, harmony not understood, a partial evil, universal good. And spite of pride in erring reason's spite, one truth is clear: whatever is right. Pope and other Enlightenment thinkers clearly held to a doctrine of infallibility by, quote, nature, end quote, and the predestination of all things in terms of nature's perfect and universal good. At the same time, they denied vehemently the sovereignty and predestination of God. When Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859, this Enlightenment doctrine of nature rapidly crumbled. Darwin himself showed traces of the old belief, but the new view of nature which appeared in Darwin was one of blind, meaningless, directionless chance. Moreover, as Darwin developed, more than a few thinkers drew the logical conclusion. Not only was life without meaning and purpose, but man and the universe were only accidents in a meaningless ocean of being. They were products, as Lucretius had ages before held, of the fortuitous concourse of atoms, arising out of emptiness and destined to return to nothingness. Another logical conclusion followed. Since God was supposedly dead, and since the old idea of nature was a myth, if meaning and direction exist at all, man must supply them. Man must take control and issue his own law and predestinating plan against the hovering darkness of chaos. Man must make his future, creating, planning and governing it as surely as he controls and governs a machine. Predestination by man was the answer to the now obsolete predestination by nature. The perverse and twisted mind of Karl Marx here revealed its caliber. Marx had earlier grasped, together with others, that the next step in humanism was predestination by man. He read that step back into nature after Hegel, seeing man, and in particular scientific planning man, as the incarnation of a struggling mind in the universe, as man's elite mind working out a plan of predestination to impose upon history and nature. The emerging force would incarnate itself in the communist world order. Marx realized that Darwin, by destroying the Enlightenment view of nature, had made scientific socialist predestination the next step in history. The publication and immediate acceptance of Darwin's thesis was thus hailed by both Marx and Engels as the assurance of their victory. Since their day, a third of the world has become Marxist and subscribes to their version of predestinarianism, or at least bows down before it. The rest of the world almost entirely follows other versions of the same humanistic predestinarianism: Fabian socialism, democratic socialism, fascism, and like faiths. Predestination is thus very much a live issue. More than that, it is now a political religious issue. Men daily look to the predestination of the state. An unplanned life is to them anathema. The gods of the state must govern all things. Two very popular and best-selling books have set forth this doctrine of radical humanistic predestination: Alvin Toffler's Future Shock, 1970, and John McHale's The Future of the Future, 1971. Both portray a future in which a scientific elite predestines all things. The future of the future is to be made by man. Man shall predestine all our tomorrows. An ominous cloud, however, appears in both books. Planners are always having trouble with man. A machine can be totally controlled. It is man's creation. A computer can be programmed to do exactly what the programmer requires within the limitations of the computer's ability. But man is God's creature, not man's. Man cannot be programmed in the radical and total way man wants. In every society, man is a stumbling block towards realizing the plan. Man still moves in terms of God's plan and purpose, not man's. In this respect, as far as humanistic planners go, B.F. Skinner in Beyond Freedom and Dignity, 1971, is still a conservative one. He still believes that by conditioning and/or controls, whether by brain implants or other means, is for the moment immaterial. Man can be controlled. Others are less hopeful, and they look for an artificial man to replace God's man in their humanistic earth or hell. Toffler tells us that humanoids, carefully wired robots, will begin to replace people, and we will be able to determine whether the smiling, assured humanoid behind the airline reservation counter is a pretty girl or a carefully wired robot. He reports also that Professor Block at Cornell speculates that man-machine sexual relationships may not be too far distant. Page 211. President Nixon has established a national goals research staff of scientific and other experts to plan the projection of social trends. All of this is a modern jargon for predestination. In this humanistic plan, man is increasingly obsolete. In God's plan, man is either a God-ordained heir of all creation, created to exercise dominion under God, or a reprobate and rebel. His every act is a part of a cosmic meaning. In man's idea of predestination, only a robot or an artificial man can meet the specifications. In various ways, man is beginning to recognize this. Among the first to see it were the disillusioned, humanistic and rebellious students of the early 1960s. The motto of one of the earliest student demonstrations, carried on badges and banners, was, "Do not fold, staple or mutilate." This was a bitter resentment against a controlled humanism, which was trying to turn man himself into a machine. The revolt declined into sullen and meaningless protest and violence because the students had no answer to the question, "What is man?" Their only answer to statist predestination was to demand either more action from the state or to turn to a sterile anarchism. The students had sensed the issue, but they had not answered it. The liberals, conservatives, and Marxists still looked to the state and to control of the state and its machinery for their answer. A great hero of the Enlightenment radicals, as well as of the 20th century conservatives, was Cicero, a champion of salvation by the state. Cicero regarded religion as a convenient means of keeping the masses obedient. For him, salvation was political and statist. He championed racial levelling, especially in his oration defending Lucius Bulbus as a means of strengthening the power of the state. He spoke of Rome in religious terms and furthered the cult of the city of Rome. He called Rome the light of the world. But within a century, Jesus Christ answered Cicero in Rome, declaring, "I am the light of the world." John chapter 8, verse 12. Cicero saw the philosopher king as the earthly incarnation of the divine mind. He hailed Augustus as Saviour, saying, "In him we place our hopes of liberty. From him we have already received salvation." In 61 BC, Cicero, who knew more than a little about the God of Israel and the Old Testament scriptures, rejected all of it as barbarian superstition. His hope was in politics and political leaders, and he was glad to see Israel conquered and its ideas ostensibly defeated. But Cicero died at the hands of his political leaders, and Rome became not a saviour, but a corrupt empire. The Ciceros of our day may not do as well, and they have less excuse than Cicero to hope in political salvation and political predestination. In 1959, the late Wilhelm Röpke wrote, "The ultimate source of all mistakes in our dealings with communism is intellectual and moral. In fact, it is our inability or unwillingness to comprehend the full substance and nature of this conflict between communism and the free world, its tremendous implacability, and deeply moral and intellectual implications. Again and again we fall into the error of conceiving this conflict to be an old-fashioned diplomatic power struggle. In reality, it is a collision of two irreconcilable systems that are intellectually and morally diametrically opposed." Wilhelm Röpke, How to Deal with the Communists, Individualist, January-February 1963. Since then, the free world has moved closer to communism, and the basic cause of its decline has been its growing humanism, its preference for the predestination of man rather than of God. But here we can borrow the language of an eloquent champion of humanistic and statist predestination, Chairman Mao Zedong. Mao is confident that all his enemies, domestic and foreign, are merely paper tigers. He is not impressed by the power of any nation in the world because, in terms of Marxist predestination, they are doomed, and they are therefore ultimately only paper tigers. But Mao is wrong. It is not Marx's plan which governs all men, nations, and history, but God's plan, for God only is absolute Lord and Sovereign of the universe. Thus, for all their momentary power, it is Marx and Mao who are paper tigers before God. We must see ourselves in all things as God ordains it. We are told emphatically, "Behold, the nations are as a drop of a bucket, and are counted as the small dust of the balance. Behold, he taketh up the isles as a very little thing." Isaiah chapter 40, verse 15. It is God whom we must fear and revere, not man. It is God who shall create the future, and already has, and it is his purpose and plan we must serve, not his enemies. The Scriptures are an announcement to men on the battlefield of the certainty of God's victory, and it is a summons to prepare for victory and to act on it. Those whom you fear, you will also bend before and serve. The fear of man bringeth a snare, but whoso putteth his trust in the Lord shall be safe. Proverbs chapter 29, verse 25. We have been called to victory. We must expect it, fight for it, and act on it. It is God's purpose for us,